The morning Catherine Brennan stepped off the stagecoach in Dry Creek, Arizona Territory, in 1878, every person on Main Street stopped to stare at the woman who had just inherited the most worthless piece of land in 3 counties. She wore a traveling dress the color of sage, her dark auburn hair pinned beneath a practical bonnet, and her green eyes surveyed the dusty town with a determination that made the local gossips whisper behind their hands. At 23 years old, she had traveled alone from Ohio after receiving word that her late uncle had left her his property, a barren stretch of alkali soil that even the cattle refused to graze. The lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, met her outside his office with an apologetic expression that told Catherine everything she needed to know before he spoke a single word. He was a portly man with sweat staining the collar of his shirt, and he mopped his brow constantly as he explained the situation. Her Uncle Samuel had been something of an eccentric, he said carefully, watching her face for signs of disappointment. The land was 5 acres on the outskirts of town, cursed with soil so poor that nothing had ever grown there except scraggly mesquite and brittle creosote bushes that looked half dead even in their prime. Catherine listened without interrupting, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. When Mr. Pemberton finished his explanation and offered to help her sell the property for whatever pittance she could get, she surprised him by declining. Instead, she asked directions to the land and where she might purchase supplies. The lawyer blinked at her, as though she had spoken in a foreign tongue, then reluctantly provided both pieces of information while warning her that she would be wasting her time and money. The property sat at the edge of town where the desert seemed to stretch endlessly toward distant purple mountains. A small wooden cabin stood in the center, weathered by wind and sun until the boards had turned silver gray. Catherine walked the perimeter of her land slowly, her boots crunching on the hard-packed earth, examining every inch of ground that now belonged to her. The soil was pale and crusty, cracking in patterns that looked like dried snakeskin. When she knelt and scooped up a handful, it ran through her fingers like ash, leaving barely any residue behind. But Catherine had not traveled 1,500 miles to give up based on appearances. She had grown up on her father's farm in Ohio before disease took both her parents within a year of each other. She knew soil, understood its moods and needs, recognized when land had been neglected rather than truly barren. This earth was thirsty and starving, suffocated beneath a crust of accumulated salts, but she believed it could be saved. She had saved dying fields before, coaxing life from dirt that others had abandoned. The next morning, she appeared at the general store with a list that made the proprietor's eyebrows rise toward his receding hairline. She wanted a plow, seed packets of every vegetable variety he stocked, amendments including gypsum and lime, wooden stakes, chicken wire, shovels, hose, buckets, and 50 pounds of composted manure if he could find it. The proprietor, a man named Silas Crawford, studied her with frank curiosity as he tallied her order. "Ma'am, I mean no disrespect, but that land you inherited would not grow weeds if you planted them in the middle of a rainstorm," he said. "You would be throwing good money after bad." "Then I suppose it is my money to throw," Catherine replied pleasantly but firmly. "When can you have these items delivered?" Silas scratched his chin. "I can have most of it ready by tomorrow afternoon. The manure might take a day or 2 longer. I will have to send word out to the ranches." "That will be fine, thank you." Catherine counted out bills from her small savings, trying not to wince at how quickly her funds were disappearing. She had enough to last perhaps 6 months if she was careful, and she would need to make the land productive before then or find work in town. She spent the rest of that day cleaning the cabin, which was filled with dust and the dried remains of insects. The single room contained an iron-framed bed with a thin mattress, a pot-bellied stove, a rickety table with 2 chairs and shelves along one wall. It was Spartan but serviceable, and Catherine had lived through worse. She swept and scrubbed until her arms ached, then hauled water from the town well to wash the single window until light streamed through the glass. The following morning, before the sun had fully risen, Catherine began working the soil. She had changed into an old work dress and tied a kerchief over her hair, and she attacked the hard earth with a determination born of necessity. The plow she had ordered was designed to be pulled by a horse, which she could not afford, so she modified it with rope and dragged it herself, the blade barely scratching the surface of the compacted ground. Sweat soaked through her dress within an hour, and her hands blistered inside her work gloves, but she continued, creating shallow furrows in a grid pattern across the entire 5 acres. That was when she first saw the cowboy. He was leading his horse to the creek that ran along the northern edge of town, taking the route that passed near her property. He sat tall in the saddle, wearing dusty work clothes and a hat pulled low against the morning sun. Catherine noticed him noticing her, but he did not stop or call out, simply continued on his way. She thought nothing of it and returned to her work, fighting the stubborn earth for every inch of progress. By noon, her arms trembled with exhaustion, and she had barely managed to plow a quarter-acre. She forced herself to eat bread and cheese in the shade of the cabin, then returned to the field. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she understood why they called this place Dry Creek, for though a creek bed existed, it held only a trickle of water even in the morning. By afternoon, it had vanished entirely into the sand. The cowboy passed by again near sunset, this time heading back toward the cluster of buildings that marked the town center. He slowed his horse and touched the brim of his hat to her, and she straightened from her work long enough to nod in return. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair visible beneath his hat and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His eyes, she noticed, were a startling blue pale as a winter sky. "Evening, ma'am," he called. "That is hard work you are doing." "It is," Catherine agreed, too tired for lengthy conversation. "Land looks different already," he said, which was generous given how little progress she had made. Then he clicked his tongue to his horse and continued on his way, leaving Catherine to wonder if he had been sincere or simply polite. She worked until darkness made it impossible to see, then stumbled back to the cabin and collapsed onto the bed without bothering to wash. Her entire body ached, and her hands throbbed where new blisters had formed over the old ones. But when she closed her eyes, she pictured neat rows of vegetables stretching across the transformed soil, green and growing and abundant. The next 3 days followed the same pattern. Catherine rose before dawn and worked until her body forced her to stop. The plow inched across the property, turning over earth that had not been disturbed in years. Silas delivered her supplies as promised, shaking his head at her stubbornness but accepting her money readily enough. The cowboy passed by each morning and evening, always nodding, sometimes offering a greeting, but never stopping long enough for a real conversation. On the 4th morning, Catherine woke to find a surprise waiting in front of her cabin. Someone had left 2 large barrels positioned to catch rainwater from the roof, along with a wooden yoke designed to carry buckets from a well or creek. There was no note, no indication of who had delivered these gifts, but Catherine suspected the cowboy. She had seen no one else paying attention to her efforts. That evening when he passed by, she was waiting by the road. "Excuse me," she called. "Did you leave those barrels by my cabin?" He reined in his horse and regarded her steadily. "I might have. Noticed you were hauling water from town in single buckets. Seemed inefficient." "That was very kind of you. May I know your name?" "Jack Prescott, ma'am. I work at the Rocking H Ranch about 5 miles west of here." "Catherine Brennan, and thank you truly." "The barrels will help tremendously, though I fear it does not rain much in these parts." "Not during summer," Jack agreed. "But when it does rain, the water comes fast and furious. Those barrels will fill in minutes during a good storm. In the meantime—" He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "The creek might be dry during the day, but water runs underground. If you dig down about 3 feet in the creek bed, you will find it. Not a lot, but enough to keep a garden going if you are patient. Catherine felt her heart lift. I did not know that. Thank you for telling me. Jack touched his hat brim again, a gesture she was coming to recognize as his standard farewell. Good luck with your garden, Miss Brennan. Folks around here could use some fresh vegetables. He rode away, and Catherine immediately walked to the creek bed, studying it with new eyes. In the morning, she would start digging a well right there in the sand and gravel. If Jack Prescott said there was water below, she believed him. He had the look of a man who knew the land intimately, who paid attention to details that others missed. Over the following week, Catherine divided her time between plowing the field and digging into the creek bed. Jack had been right. At just over 3 feet deep, water began seeping into the hole she had created, collecting in a shallow pool that deepened slowly overnight. It was not much, barely enough to fill her buckets twice a day, but it was enough to begin. She started preparing the soil in earnest, working the gypsum and lime into the earth to break up the accumulated salts. She added the composted manure, spreading it thick across the plowed ground. The work was backbreaking, especially in the relentless heat, but Catherine persisted. She wore her oldest clothes and gave up any pretense of maintaining the appearance expected of an unmarried woman in town. Her face browned in the sun, her hands grew calloused and strong, and she moved with the steady rhythm of someone who understood that great changes happened through small, consistent actions. Jack continued to pass by twice daily on his way to and from the ranch. Sometimes he simply nodded and kept riding. Other times, he would stop and they would talk for a few minutes, conversations that ranged from weather predictions to the best crops for alkaline soil. He never stayed long, seemed almost shy about intruding on her work, but Catherine found herself looking forward to these brief interactions. There was something steady and reassuring about Jack Prescott, a quietness that felt like strength rather than timidity. One morning, nearly 3 weeks after Catherine had arrived in Dry Creek, she was carrying water from the creek bed well when she stumbled, splashing half the bucket's contents across the ground. She cursed under her breath, frustrated by her clumsiness and the waste of precious water. When she straightened, Jack was there, dismounting from his horse without being asked. "Let me help," he said simply. "I cannot ask you to do that. You have your own work to get to. Ranch does not need me for another hour yet. I ride out early." He picked up the yoke and buckets. "Show me where you want the water." Catherine hesitated, pride warring with practicality. Finally, practicality won. She led him to the section of field where she was focusing her initial planting efforts, about an acre of ground that she had worked most intensively. Jack made 4 trips to the creek bed, hauling water with an ease that made Catherine acutely aware of her own physical limitations. He poured it carefully where she directed, then helped her mix it into the amended soil until the consistency was right for planting. "You are really going to make this work, are not you?" he said, and there was something like admiration in his voice. "I am certainly going to try." Catherine knelt in the damp earth, running her fingers through the improved texture. "This soil is not dead, just neglected. It wants to grow things." "I can feel it." Jack watched her silently for a moment. "My mother used to talk like that about her garden back before she passed, said she could hear what the plants needed if she listened close enough. Was she successful? She could grow flowers in the middle of the desert. Roses even, though my father said it was a waste of good water." Jack's expression softened with memory. She said beauty was never a waste. Catherine looked up at him, seeing past the quiet cowboy exterior to the man who missed his mother and understood why someone would fight for a garden in impossible conditions. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. He cleared his throat, seeming embarrassed by the personal turn of the conversation. "I should get going, but Miss Brennan, if you would like, I could stop by mornings and help with the watering. I pass this way anyhow, and it would only add a few minutes to my ride." Catherine's first instinct was to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own. But she was learning that survival in this harsh land sometimes meant accepting help when it was genuinely offered. "I would appreciate that very much, Mr. Prescott, but only if you let me repay you somehow." "Perhaps with vegetables once the garden is producing? That seems more than fair." Jack smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something warmer and younger. "I will see you tomorrow morning then." True to his word, Jack appeared the next morning just as the sun was rising. He watered the prepared section of field while Catherine worked on expanding the plowed area, and then he rode off to his ranch job. The following morning he came again, and the morning after that. Within a week, it had become an established routine. Jack would arrive with the dawn, help water the garden, sometimes stay to help with other tasks if he had time, and then head to the Rocking H Ranch. In the evenings, he would often stop again on his way home, checking on the progress and offering advice based on his years of living in the Arizona territory. Catherine found herself organizing her days around these visits, making sure she had coffee ready in the mornings, and taking care with her appearance in ways she had neglected during those first difficult weeks. She told herself it was simply good manners, that anyone would do the same for a friend who was providing such valuable help. But in her more honest moments, she admitted that her feelings for Jack Prescott were becoming more than friendly appreciation. A month after she had begun planting, the first green shoots appeared. Catherine discovered them early one morning, tiny emerald crescents pushing through the dark soil in the neat rows where she had planted lettuce seeds. She knelt in the dirt, hardly daring to breathe, touching the fragile new growth with trembling fingers. The seeds had germinated. Life was returning to the supposedly dead land. When Jack arrived for his morning watering ritual, Catherine practically dragged him to the emerging seedlings. "Look," she said, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "They are growing, I was right. The soil just needed help." Jack crouched beside her, examining the tiny plants with the same careful attention he gave everything. "I never doubted you," he said quietly. "You have got a gift, Catherine." Not many people could have done this. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his low voice sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "I could not have done it without your help," she said truthfully. "The watering alone would have taken me half the day. We make a good team." Jack looked at her, and the expression in his blue eyes made Catherine's breath catch. For a long moment they simply gazed at each other, the moment stretching between them filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Jack cleared his throat and stood, offering her his hand to help her up. "I should get that watering done. Do not want these little ones to get too dry." They fell into their usual routine, but something had shifted between them. Catherine felt it in the way Jack's hand lingered when he passed her a bucket, in the way his eyes followed her as she moved through the garden, in the careful way he avoided standing too close, yet seemed drawn to her presence. She recognized these signs because she felt the same magnetic pull toward him, a growing connection that went beyond friendship or gratitude. The garden flourished under their combined care. The lettuce was followed by tomato plants pushing through the soil, then beans, squash, carrots, and herbs. Catherine had staggered her planting to ensure a continuous harvest, and her careful soil management was paying off. The once pale earth had darkened to a rich brown in the cultivated section, and the plants grew with surprising vigor. Word spread through Dry Creek about the miracle garden on worthless land. People began stopping by to see for themselves, some skeptical, others amazed, a few asking for advice about their own struggling gardens. Catherine welcomed them all, sharing what she knew freely. A widow named Mrs. Peterson brought her a basket of preserves as thanks for the tips that had saved her own vegetable plot. The school teacher, Miss Adelaide Grant, visited and declared that Catherine should speak to her students about agriculture and perseverance. But despite the growing attention and acceptance from the town, Catherine found that the moments she treasured most were still those early mornings with Jack, working side by side in the quiet hours before the world fully woke. They talked about everything and nothing during those times. Jack told her about growing up on his family's small ranch before his parents died, and he had to hire on as a ranch hand. Catherine shared stories of Ohio, of her parents and the farm she had loved and lost. One morning in late August, nearly 3 months after Catherine had arrived in Dry Creek, Jack came to help with the watering and found her sitting on the cabin steps with her head in her hands. He tied his horse quickly and crossed to her, concern evident on his face. "What is wrong? Are you ill?" Catherine looked up and he could see she had been crying. "I received a letter from Mr. Pemberton yesterday. There are back taxes owed on this property, more than I knew about. If I cannot pay them by the end of September, the county will seize the land." Her voice broke. "I have put everything into this garden, Jack, everything, and it still is not enough." Jack sat beside her on the steps, close enough that their shoulders touched. "How much do you need?" $200. "I have perhaps 30 remaining from my savings, and even when the garden is fully producing, I will not make that much in time." "I have some money saved," Jack said immediately. "Not all of it, but I could loan you." "No," Catherine shook her head firmly. "You have worked hard for your wages, Jack. I will not take them. There must be another way." They sat in silence for several minutes, both thinking. Finally, Jack spoke. "What if we approach the merchants in town? Your garden could supply fresh produce for the restaurant, the hotel, the boarding houses. If we could get them to pay in advance for guaranteed delivery, that might raise enough." Catherine turned to look at him, hope flickering in her green eyes. "Do you think they would agree to that?" "Only one way to find out. The harvest is starting to come in now, right? We could bring samples, show them the quality." By mid-morning, they had harvested the best specimens the garden had to offer: perfect red tomatoes, crisp lettuce, tender young carrots, and fragrant basil. Catherine arranged them in a basket while Jack saddled his horse and then helped her up behind him for the ride into town. It felt natural to wrap her arms around his waist, to feel the solid warmth of him against her as they rode. If circumstances had been different, if she had not been worried sick about losing everything, she might have allowed herself to simply enjoy the closeness. Their first stop was the Dry Creek restaurant, run by a formidable woman named Beatrice Hall, who was known for her exacting standards. Catherine's heart pounded as she and Jack presented their proposal, showing the produce and explaining how regular deliveries could improve the restaurant's menu while supporting local agriculture. Mrs. Hall examined each vegetable carefully, even going so far as to taste a slice of tomato that Catherine cut for her. Her expression revealed nothing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "How often could you deliver?" 3 times a week to start," Catherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "More often once the full garden is producing." "And the prices?" Catherine named figures that were fair but not cheap, understanding that undervaluing her work would only hurt her in the long term. Mrs. Hall nodded slowly, then extended her hand. "You have a deal, Miss Brennan. I will take $20 worth of produce per week, paid in advance for the first month to help with your tax situation. $80 total. And if the quality remains this high, we will continue the arrangement indefinitely." Catherine felt tears of relief spring to her eyes as she shook Mrs. Hall's hand. "Thank you. You will not regret this." Emboldened by this success, they visited the hotel next, then the 2 boarding houses, and finally the general store where Silas Crawford agreed to sell her excess produce on commission. By the end of the day, Catherine had secured advance payments totaling $190, just $10 short of what she needed. Jack rode with her back to the property, and they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "We are almost there," he said. "I can cover the last $10, Catherine. Please let me do this." She looked at him, at the earnest expression on his handsome face, and felt her heart swell with emotion. "Why are you doing all this for me, Jack?" "The watering, the help with the merchants, everything." "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching hers. "I think you know why," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "I have been trying to work up the courage to say something for weeks now, but I am not a man who is good with words. I am better with actions, with showing up and doing the work that needs doing. But maybe that is not enough. Maybe I need to say it plain." Catherine's breath caught. "Say what?" "That I am in love with you, Catherine Brennan. I think I have been since the first day I saw you dragging that plow across ground that everyone said was worthless, too stubborn or too brave to listen to the naysayers. You saw potential where no one else did, in this land and maybe in me too. I am just a ranch hand with not much to my name, but if you would have me, I would spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Catherine felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears this time. "I am in love with you too, Jack. I have been for a while now, but I was afraid to say anything, afraid of presuming too much or complicating what we had." "Then uncomplicate it," Jack said, reaching out to cup her face gently in his calloused hand. "Say you will let me court you properly. Say that maybe someday you might consider becoming my wife." "I will," Catherine whispered. "To both of those things, yes." Jack's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Catherine met him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle and sweet, flavored with salt from her tears and filled with all the emotion they had been holding back for months. When they finally pulled apart, Catherine laughed with pure joy, and Jack gathered her close, holding her as if she was the most precious thing in the world. The next morning, Jack arrived for the watering as usual, but now he greeted Catherine with a kiss before picking up the buckets. They worked together with a new ease, the unspoken tension between them replaced by the comfort of acknowledged feelings. Jack insisted on contributing the final $10 for the taxes, and Catherine accepted, understanding that allowing him to help was its own form of trust and intimacy. She paid the back taxes with 2 days to spare, and Mr. Pemberton filed the paperwork that secured her ownership of the land. Catherine felt as if an enormous weight had lifted from her shoulders. The garden was hers, truly and completely, and it was thriving beyond her wildest expectations. As summer faded into fall, the garden reached its peak production. Catherine was harvesting vegetables daily, fulfilling her contracts with room to spare. She sold the excess to townspeople who had learned that her produce was worth the slightly higher price she charged. Her reputation grew, and people began calling her the Garden Lady, a title she wore with pride. Jack continued to help with the watering every morning, but now he stayed longer when his ranch work allowed. They talked about the future, making plans that included both of them. Jack admitted that his dream had always been to have his own small ranch, nothing fancy, just enough land to run a modest herd and maybe grow some crops. Catherine shared that she wanted to expand the garden, to experiment with fruit trees and see if she could coax even more life from the reclaimed soil. One evening in October, as they sat together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Jack took Catherine's hand. "I have been saving my wages for years now," he said. "Between what I have put away and what you are earning from the garden, we would have enough to buy some adjoining land. Maybe build a proper house. Start that ranch I have been dreaming about." "Are you proposing a business partnership or something more?" Catherine asked, though the smile on her face suggested she already knew the answer. Jack slid off the cabin steps onto one knee, still holding her hand. "I am proposing marriage, Catherine. I want to build a life with you, a ranch and a garden, and maybe a family if we are blessed. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to be the one who helps you water your dreams, whatever they might be." "Yes," Catherine said, pulling him up to kiss him properly. "Yes to all of it, Jack Prescott. I cannot imagine a future without you in it." They were married in November in a simple ceremony at the town church with half of Dry Creek in attendance. Mrs. Hall provided the wedding feast, using vegetables from Catherine's garden. The widow Mrs. Peterson made Catherine's dress, a simple but elegant gown in cream-colored silk. Silas Crawford stood up as Jack's best man, and Miss Adelaide Grant served as Catherine's attendant. It was a community celebration, everyone coming together to support the couple who had proven that determination and love could transform even the most barren circumstances into something beautiful. After the wedding, Jack moved into the cabin, which suddenly felt much less Spartan with two people sharing the space. They began making plans for a larger house, drawing sketches by lamplight and debating the merits of different layouts. Jack filed on 160 acres of unclaimed land adjacent to Catherine's garden, and they started running a small herd of cattle that he purchased with his savings. The first winter tested them. Water became scarcer, and the garden went dormant except for a few cold, hardy crops. But they had prepared for this, setting aside money from the abundant fall harvest. Jack worked longer hours at the Rocking H Ranch, and Catherine spent her time improving the soil in the sections she had not yet planted, always preparing for the next growing season. They learned each other's habits and rhythms during those quiet winter months. Jack discovered that Catherine hummed while she worked, old folk songs her mother had taught her. Catherine learned that Jack was surprisingly well-read, that he treasured a small collection of books and liked to read aloud in the evenings. They talked about their childhoods, their fears and hopes, the losses they had endured and how those losses had shaped them. One cold January evening, Catherine told Jack that she was pregnant. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the small cabin, his face alight with joy. They held each other close that night, marveling at the new life they had created together. Another seed planted in the fertile ground of their love, spring arrived, and with it came renewed work. Catherine was careful not to overexert herself in her condition, but she could not be kept from the garden entirely. Jack took on more of the physical labor, and they hired a young man from town to help with the heaviest tasks. The garden burst back to life, and Catherine's contracts with the local businesses resumed with even greater orders than before. In late April, they broke ground on the new house. It would be a real home, with multiple rooms and a deep porch for sitting in the evenings. Jack did much of the work himself, with help from friends he had made over his years in the territory. The framework went up quickly, and by June, the house was taking shape. Their son was born in August of 1879, delivered by the town doctor with Mrs. Peterson assisting. They named him Samuel, after Catherine's uncle whose supposed worthless land had brought her to Arizona and ultimately to Jack. The baby was healthy and strong, with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Jack held his son with the same careful attention he gave to everything precious in his life, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. Catherine recovered quickly from the birth, determined not to let the garden suffer during the peak harvest season. She worked with Samuel strapped to her chest in a sling, and the baby seemed content with the arrangement, napping in the warm sun while his mother tended the plants. Jack worried about her overdoing it, but Catherine assured him that staying active was good for both her and the baby. The new house was finished in September, a solid structure of wood and stone that felt like a mansion after the tiny cabin. They moved in with ceremony, Jack carrying Catherine and Samuel across the threshold while Catherine laughed at his insistence on maintaining tradition. The cabin became a storage shed and tool room, a reminder of humble beginnings that they were both determined never to forget. As their son grew, the ranch and garden flourished. Jack's cattle herd expanded steadily, and he developed a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Catherine experimented with new crops, successfully introducing several varieties that other local farmers had thought impossible to grow. She began selling seeds she had saved and adapted to the challenging conditions, creating another income stream. The land that everyone had called worthless became a showplace. Visitors came from neighboring towns to see what Catherine had accomplished, and she always welcomed them, sharing her knowledge freely. She believed that success should lift the entire community, not just one person. Several other gardens appeared in Dry Creek, inspired by her example, and the town began to develop a reputation for its produce. In the spring of 1881, Catherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose after Jack's mother. The little girl was as different from her brother as could be, with blonde hair that suggested some recessive gene from deep in the family lines and eyes that shifted between blue and green depending on the light. She was a happy baby who laughed easily and seemed fascinated by everything around her. Jack proved to be a devoted father, spending every free moment with his children. He taught Samuel to ride before the boy could walk properly, setting him on the gentlest horse with infinite patience. He sang lullabies to Rose in his deep voice, old cowboy songs that Catherine suspected were not originally written as children's music but which worked perfectly nonetheless. The years flowed by, marked by the rhythms of planting and harvest, birth and growth. In 1883, they added a third child to their family, another boy they named Thomas. By then, the ranch had grown to 500 acres, and the garden had expanded to 10 acres of intensively cultivated land. They employed several ranch hands and a young woman from town who helped Catherine with the children and the house. Samuel, at 4 years old, was already showing signs of inheriting his mother's affinity for growing things. He followed Catherine through the garden constantly, asking endless questions about why plants did what they did. Rose, at 2, was more interested in the animals, toddling after her father to feed the chickens or pet the horses. Baby Thomas was too young to show preferences yet, but he had a peaceful temperament that suggested he would be an easy child. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their house watching the children play in the yard, Catherine leaned against Jack's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked. "Back when you first saw me trying to plow that impossible field," Jack wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "I imagine wanting to know you better," he admitted. "But the rest of it, all of this, it is beyond anything I could have dreamed." "You took something worthless and made it into paradise, Catherine, not just the land, but our whole life." "We did it together," Catherine corrected. "I could never have managed without you. The watering alone was the least I could do," Jack interrupted. "You are the one with the vision, the determination, the gift. I just helped where I could." Catherine turned to kiss him, still feeling that rush of love and gratitude that had never diminished over the years. "You did more than help. You believed in me when no one else did. You showed up every single morning not because you had to, but because you wanted to. That constancy, that quiet support, it meant everything." Their life together continued to deepen and expand. In 1885, Catherine gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named Catherine and Jack after themselves, though they called them Katie and Cole to avoid confusion. The arrival of twins was a surprise, but a welcome one, though it made the house feel suddenly much smaller. They began planning an addition, more bedrooms to accommodate their growing family. The garden had become legendary by this point. Agricultural experts from the Territorial University came to study Catherine's methods, documenting her soil management techniques and crop rotation strategies. She was invited to speak at farming conferences, though she rarely accepted, preferring to stay close to home and family. When she did speak, however, her practical wisdom and lack of pretension made her a popular figure. Jack's ranch was equally successful. He had developed a strain of cattle particularly well-suited to the harsh Arizona climate, and ranchers came from across the territory to buy his breeding stock. He was known for his integrity, his knowledge of animal husbandry, and his willingness to share what he had learned. Like Catherine with her garden, Jack believed in lifting others up rather than hoarding success. The children grew in this atmosphere of hard work, generosity, and love. Samuel became Catherine's right hand in the garden, developing an intuitive understanding of plants that rivaled his mother's. Rose took to ranching like she was born to it, able to rope a steer by the time she was 8 and riding better than many grown men. Thomas showed an aptitude for mechanics and was always tinkering with equipment, finding ways to make their work more efficient. The twins were still young, but Katie seemed drawn to books and learning while Cole followed his older siblings around, eager to do whatever they were doing. In 1888, tragedy struck when a fire broke out in the barn during a dry spell. Jack and the ranch hands managed to save the animals, but the structure was destroyed along with a season's worth of stored hay. It was a significant loss, one that would have broken a less established operation. But Catherine and Jack had built their success on a foundation of resilience and mutual support. They rebuilt, and the community that had benefited from their generosity over the years rallied to help, donating materials and labor. This experience reinforced what Catherine and Jack already knew: that true wealth was not measured in money or possessions, but in relationships and community. Their children learned this lesson too, seeing how people showed up in times of crisis, how helping hands were extended without expectation of repayment. By 1890, the land that Catherine had inherited 12 years earlier was unrecognizable. Where once there had been nothing but alkali crust and dying mesquite, there now stood a thriving ranch with a magnificent garden at its heart. Fruit trees that everyone said would not grow flourished in carefully tended orchards. Vegetables grew in abundance, supplying not just Dry Creek but several surrounding towns. The house had been expanded twice and was now a sprawling, comfortable home filled with the noise and energy of 5 children. Jack was 37 years old, his dark hair showing threads of silver at the temples, his face lined by years of sun and work but still handsome, still capable of making Catherine's heart skip when he smiled at her. Catherine was 35, her auburn hair still vibrant though now often escaping from the practical buns she wore for work. Her hands bore the permanent calluses of a gardener, and her face showed the marks of a life lived largely outdoors, but her green eyes still sparkled with the determination and vision that had brought her to Arizona in the first place. They stood together one morning in the early spring of 1890, surveying their land as they had done countless times before. Jack's arm was around Catherine's waist, her head resting on his shoulder. Samuel, now 11, was already in the garden checking on the early seedlings. Rose, at 9, was helping one of the ranch hands feed the horses. Thomas, 7, was attempting to fix a loose board on the chicken coop. The twins, 5 years old, were supposed to be getting ready for school but were currently engaged in some elaborate game that involved a great deal of running and shrieking. "We should expand the orchard," Catherine said, pointing to a section of land they had recently purchased. "Apple trees there and maybe peaches along the southern edge." "Everyone will say it cannot be done," Jack replied with a smile. "You know that, right? Let them say it. They said the same thing about the garden, about the cattle, about everything we have done. Being told something is impossible has never stopped us before." Jack laughed and pulled her closer. "No, it has not. Though I have to say I am grateful we have help now. I still remember those first months trying to water 5 acres by myself every morning." "You never complained once," Catherine said softly. "Not even when I know you must have been exhausted." "How could I complain? I was falling in love. That gave me all the energy I needed." They stood in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, watching their children and taking in the evidence of everything they had built together. This land, this life, this family. It had all started with one woman's stubborn refusal to accept that something was worthless simply because everyone said so, and one man's quiet decision to show up every morning and help water her dreams. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. In 1892, the territorial government recognized Catherine's contributions to agriculture by awarding her a commendation, an honor rarely given to women. She attended the ceremony in Phoenix with Jack and the children, accepting the recognition with her characteristic grace and humility, then immediately deflecting credit to Jack and the entire Dry Creek community. Samuel, at 13, was already being courted by the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a pretty girl named Emma who shared his passion for growing things. Catherine and Jack watched this budding romance with amusement and a touch of melancholy, recognizing that their oldest child was approaching the age when he would start thinking about his own future and family. Rose announced at age 11 that she had no intention of ever marrying, that she was going to run her own ranch and did not need a husband to do it. Catherine and Jack exchanged glances but wisely said nothing. Rose had always known her own mind, and they had learned that arguing with her was futile. Besides, Catherine secretly admired her daughter's independence, even if she hoped Rose would eventually find the kind of partnership she and Jack shared. Thomas developed an interest in engineering, inspired by the new innovations appearing in the territory as it modernized. He talked about going to university one day, studying mechanical design. Jack encouraged this ambition, setting aside money specifically for Thomas's education. The twins were inseparable, inventing elaborate games and schemes that frequently tried Catherine's patience. Katie was reading at a level far beyond her years, while Cole showed an artistic talent that surprised everyone, drawing remarkably accurate sketches of the ranch animals and landscape. In 1894, when Catherine was 39 and Jack was 41, they learned they were expecting another child. This pregnancy was unexpected, and Catherine initially worried about the risks at her age. But as she had done with everything else in her life, she faced this challenge with determination and faith. The baby, another girl they named Grace, was born healthy in early 1895. She was a beautiful child, with her mother's red hair and her father's blue eyes, and she completed their family in a way that felt absolutely right. The older children doted on baby Grace. Samuel, now 16 and quite serious about Emma, practiced being responsible by helping with his youngest sister. Rose, 13 and still maintaining she wanted nothing to do with marriage or babies, nonetheless could be found singing lullabies to Grace when she thought no one was listening. Thomas, 11, declared that he would build mechanical toys for Grace when she was older. The twins, 9, argued over who got to hold her more often. As Arizona Territory moved toward statehood, the Prescott Ranch and Garden became something of a landmark. Politicians and businessmen visited, wanting to showcase local success stories. Catherine and Jack received these visits with their usual hospitality, but they never let the attention change who they were at their core. They remained working ranchers and farmers, people who got up before dawn and came home exhausted after sunset, people who knew the value of $1 and the satisfaction of a job well done. In 1897, Samuel married Emma in a beautiful ceremony on the ranch, with the wedding feast held in the expanded garden under strings of lanterns. It was a joyful celebration, made more so when Samuel and Emma announced they would be starting their own farm on land adjoining the ranch. Catherine cried happy tears, knowing that her son would be carrying on the legacy she had begun, taking the skills she had taught him and building his own dreams. Rose, at 16, was managing much of the ranch's daily operations, proving that her childhood declaration about not needing a husband had been sincere. She ran the cattle operations with confidence and skill, earning the respect of the ranch hands who were twice her age. Jack was immensely proud of her, recognizing that she had inherited the best qualities of both her parents. Thomas left for university in 1898, the first member of the family to pursue higher education. It was a bittersweet moment, Catherine and Jack standing on the train platform watching their third child head off into the wider world. But they were also proud, knowing they had given their children the foundation to pursue whatever dreams called to them. The twins were 13 when Thomas left, growing into their own distinct personalities. Katie was emerging as a natural teacher, endlessly patient in explaining things to her little sister Grace. Cole's artistic talents had developed to the point where his sketches were small masterworks, capturing the essence of ranch life with remarkable sensitivity. As the century drew to a close, Catherine and Jack found themselves entering a new phase of life. They were grandparents now, with Samuel and Emma producing 2 children in quick succession. The ranch and garden were well established, almost running themselves with the help of capable employees and the older children. For the first time in their marriage, they had moments of leisure, time to simply sit together and reflect on the life they had built. One evening in December of 1899, as the new century approached, they sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. Grace, now 4, was asleep inside. The twins were in town at a dance. Rose was checking on a sick cow in the barn. It was just the 2 of them, wrapped in blankets against the winter chill, watching stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. "We should have a party for the new century," Catherine said. "Invite everyone who has been part of our story, make it a real celebration." "That would be quite a crowd," Jack replied with a smile, "but I think it is a fine idea. We have a lot to celebrate. We do we not?" Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, as comfortable with this gesture after 21 years of marriage as she had been on their first day together. "Sometimes I still can't quite believe it all, Jack. That pile of worthless dirt turned into all of this." "It was never worthless," Jack said firmly. "It just needed someone who could see its potential, same as me. I was just a drifting cowboy with no real prospects until you came along." Catherine lifted her head to look at him. "That is not true. You always had value, Jack Prescott. You just needed someone to see it, same as the land. Well, I am grateful you saw it, both in the land and in me." He kissed her forehead gently. "You know what I remember most about those early days, not how hard the work was or how impossible it seemed. I remember how you looked in the morning light, so fierce and determined, covered in dust and sweat and still beautiful. I remember thinking that if I could just keep showing up, keep helping you water those dreams of yours, maybe you would let me be part of them." "You became essential to them," Catherine said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I could not have done any of this without you, Jack. Not the garden, not the ranch, not the family. You have been my partner in every sense of the word." They held each other close as the stars wheeled overhead, 2 people who had found each other against unlikely odds and built something extraordinary together. The new century was coming, full of changes and challenges they could not yet imagine. But they had weathered every storm so far, and they would weather whatever came next the same way they always had. Together, with determination and love, watering each other's dreams until they flourished. The party they threw to welcome the 20th century became legendary in Dry Creek. The entire town came, along with friends from across the territory. Tables groaned under the weight of food prepared from the garden's produce and meat from the ranch's cattle. Children ran wild in the winter twilight while adults danced to fiddle music and shared stories. Samuel and Emma were there with their children. Thomas came home from university. Rose took a break from her ranching duties to actually wear a dress and dance, surprising everyone including herself when she seemed to enjoy it. The twins helped Grace feel included in the festivities, making sure their little sister had the best time possible. At midnight, as 1900 arrived, Catherine and Jack stood surrounded by their family and community, hands clasped, hearts full. They had started with nothing but determination and a plot of supposedly worthless land. They had built an empire of sorts, though not the kind measured in dollars alone. Their wealth was in the richness of the soil they had reclaimed, in the strength of the family they had created, in the depth of the love they shared. The years that followed were good ones. Samuel's farm thrived, and he frequently consulted with his mother about new techniques and crops. Rose finally met someone who matched her stubborn independence, a cattle buyer from Texas who treated her as an equal partner. They married in 1902 and merged their operations, creating one of the largest ranches in the territory. Thomas graduated from university with honors and returned to Arizona to work on innovative irrigation projects that helped other farmers access reliable water. Katie went to teachers' college, and came back to teach at the Dry Creek School, inspiring a new generation of students the way Miss Adelaide Grant had once inspired her mother's generation. Cole's art gained recognition, and he was commissioned to create paintings documenting the changing landscape of the American West. Grace grew up surrounded by love and opportunity, developing into a confident young woman who inherited the best qualities of her entire family. Through it all, Catherine and Jack remained at the heart of everything. They aged gracefully, their hair turning white, their faces becoming maps of life well lived. Catherine still worked in the garden every day that her body allowed, though she moved more slowly now and let others do the heavy lifting. Jack still rose early to check on the cattle and horses, though he too had slowed down, accepting that age brought its own limitations. In 1910, when Catherine was 55 and Jack was 57, Arizona achieved statehood. They attended the celebrations, honored guests because of their contributions to the territory's development. But more than the formal recognition, they cherished the handwritten notes from farmers whose families had better lives because of the techniques Catherine had shared, from ranchers whose herds had improved thanks to Jack's breeding programs, from young people whose educations had been supported by the Prescott's quiet generosity. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, their children and grandchildren threw them a surprise party. The house was packed with 3 generations of family, plus friends from across the state. There were speeches and toasts, stories and laughter, old photographs passed around that showed the progression from that first small cabin and struggling garden to the prosperous ranch that now stood. Samuel told the story of his mother's arrival, of how she had refused to accept that the land was worthless. Emma added details about the early garden, information she had learned from her mother-in-law during long afternoons working side by side. Rose, tough as nails Rose, who rarely showed sentiment, teared up as she talked about watching her parents work together, how they had taught her that true partnership meant supporting each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. Thomas spoke about the irrigation innovations his parents had pioneered, how their methods were now being studied and replicated across the arid West. Katie read a poem she had written about her parents' love, and Cole presented them with a painting he had created showing the original cabin and garden plot as they existed in 1878, rendered with such care and detail that Catherine cried looking at it. Little Grace, now 15 and not so little anymore, simply hugged her parents and thanked them for showing her what true love looked like, for giving her a foundation of security and care that she knew would guide her through whatever life brought. When it was Jack's turn to speak, he stood with Catherine's hand clasped in his and looked around at the gathered faces, at the evidence of the life they had created together. 30 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, I was a lonely cowboy who happened to ride past a woman trying to plow impossible ground. I could have kept riding. Maybe I should have, by all logical reasoning. That land was worthless, everyone said so. But something made me stop, made me offer to help with the watering. Best decision I ever made. He turned to Catherine, his blue eyes still as clear and loving as they had been 3 decades before. You taught me that nothing is worthless if someone is willing to see its potential and do the work to bring it out. You did that with the land, and you did it with me. I was drifting before I met you, just going through the motions of living. You gave me purpose, partnership, and a love deeper than I knew was possible. Every morning I helped water your garden. I was really watering us, helping our life together grow, and look at what we have grown. He gestured to the room full of family and friends. This is the real harvest. These people, these relationships, this love. Thank you for letting me be part of it. There was not a dry eye in the house when Jack finished speaking. Catherine stood and kissed him, not caring that they had an audience, just wanting him to know without words how much his speech had meant to her. They held each other while their family applauded. 2 people who had proven that with determination, partnership, and love, nothing was truly worthless. The years continued to pass, marked by births and deaths, successes and challenges, the endless cycle of seasons that governed ranch and garden life. Catherine and Jack grew older but never lost the essential spark that had drawn them together. They still took morning walks through the garden when weather permitted, still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still looked at each other with love and appreciation. In 1915, when Catherine was 60 and Jack was 62, they celebrated their own birthdays quietly, just the two of them, taking a rare day off from work to simply be together. They rode out to the original garden plot, the 5 acres that had started everything. It was still cultivated, still productive, though it was now just one small part of a much larger operation. They walked the rows hand in hand, Catherine pointing out where she had first planted each type of vegetable, Jack reminding her of particularly challenging moments they had overcome together. They visited the creek bed where Jack had shown Catherine how to dig for hidden water, a technique that had saved the garden during multiple droughts. They stood in front of the old cabin, now maintained as a sort of monument to their beginnings, and marveled at how far they had come. "If I could go back and talk to that young woman who stepped off the stagecoach in 1878, Catherine said thoughtfully, "I wonder what I would tell her." "What would you say?" Jack asked. "I think I would tell her that everything is going to be harder than she imagines, but also more wonderful. That she is going to lose sleep and blister her hands and cry from frustration more times than she can count. But that she is also going to fall in love with a good man who will show up for her every single day. That together, they are going to build something that matters, something that lasts. That the worthless land is going to bloom, and so is her heart." Jack pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I would tell that young cowboy who first saw her fighting with that plow to get off his horse and introduce himself immediately instead of waiting. Tell him not to waste a single day, because every moment with this remarkable woman is precious." They stood together as the sun began to set, painting the Arizona sky in the brilliant colors they had watched together for nearly 4 decades. The garden stretched around them, green and growing, fed by the same water Jack had helped Catherine haul bucket by bucket all those years ago. It was a testament to persistence, to vision, to the transformative power of consistent, patient care. As darkness fell and they finally turned to head home, Catherine looked back one more time at the land that everyone had called worthless. She smiled, thinking about the journey from that first hopeful seed to the abundant harvest that now sustained not just their family but an entire community. She thought about the cowboy who had watered it every morning after, who had believed in her and her dreams when belief was the most precious gift he could offer. "Thank you," she said quietly, squeezing Jack's hand. "For what?" he asked, though his smile suggested he knew. "For watering the garden, for watering us. For every morning, every bucket of water, every word of encouragement, every moment of support, for being exactly who you are." "Catherine Prescott," Jack said, using her married name with the same reverence he always had. "Loving you and supporting your dreams has been the greatest privilege of my life. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They walked home together through the gathering darkness, two people who had taken something worthless and made it bloom, who had proven that with love and dedication and partnership, any ground could become fertile, any dream could grow. Behind them, the garden rested in the cool night air, preparing for another day of growth and abundance, a living monument to the power of showing up day after day to water the things that matter most. Their story became part of the fabric of Arizona, passed down through generations as an example of pioneer spirit and enduring love. The garden continued to flourish long after Catherine and Jack were gone, maintained by children and grandchildren who carried on the legacy. The techniques Catherine developed were taught in agricultural schools. The partnership she and Jack modeled became the gold standard for what a marriage could be. But the true measure of their success was not in the awards or recognition, or even the thriving ranch. It was in the countless mornings Jack had shown up with buckets and a willing heart, in Catherine's unwavering belief that worthless was just a word used by people who lacked imagination, in the way they had built a life together where dreams flourished because they were watered daily with love, respect, and partnership. That was the real harvest, the one that lasted beyond any single growing season, the one that continued to bear fruit in the lives of everyone they touched. And it all began with a woman who planted a garden on land they called worthless, and a cowboy who watered it every morning after, not because he had to, but because love made him want to show up, day after day, to help beautiful things grow.